The CEO millionaire humiliated his ex, but when he saw her with his sons, he collapsed. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the luxury penthouse as Blake Sterling hurled his phone against the wall. Another business deal closed, another billion added to his empire, but the triumph felt hollow. At 31 he was America's youngest tech billionaire, the genius behind Sterling Innovations. The headlines called him ruthless, brilliant, unstoppable. But today something else caught his eye on social media, something that made his blood run cold. There she was, Madison Hayes, his ex-wife. The woman he'd left behind on his climb to the top. She was smiling in the photo, but it wasn't her smile that stopped him cold, it was the two boys beside her. His sons Hunter and Mason, both 10 years old now. Their science project had just won first place at Washington Prep, the most prestigious private school in Seattle. Blake ran his fingers through his dark hair, fighting back memories of a time before the money, before the fame. Back when he and Madison were just two college kids sharing dreams and instant noodles in their tiny apartment. She believed in him when no one else did, worked 3 jobs to support them while he built his first prototype. Now he could buy and sell that entire apartment building 1,000 times over, but the cost had been everything that mattered. Last month's charity gala still burned in his mind. Madison had approached him about the boys' advanced coding program, something that should have made him proud as a tech innovator. Instead, he turned it into a weapon. Still can't afford to give our kids what they need without begging, Maddie? He'd sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe if you'd finished college instead of dropping out, you wouldn't need to keep asking for handouts. The memory of her face in that moment haunted him more than he cared to admit. The way the light had died in those striking blue eyes that used to look at him with so much love. But he was Blake Sterling now. He'd clawed his way from nothing to everything, and emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford. Mr. Sterling? His assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. The investors from Tokyo are waiting in the conference room. Blake straightened his $10,000 suit and turned away from the shattered phone. Deals to close. Money to make. Empire to build. That's what mattered. But the image of his sons wouldn't leave his mind. Hunter and Mason. They had his features but Madison's gentle eyes. When was the last time he'd actually heard their voices? Sat down to dinner with them? Been a real father instead of just a number on a child support check? The boys were coding prodigies, of course they were, with his genes. But instead of pride, all he felt was an emptiness so deep it threatened to swallow him whole. He'd given them everything money could buy but nothing of himself, just like his own father had done to him. Someone had already replaced his shattered phone with a new one. Another photo notification popped up, the twins at their robotics club, grinning with pride at their latest creation. Blake's hand trembled slightly as he slipped the phone into his pocket. He had a meeting to run. That's all that mattered now. But deep in his gut, a voice he'd spent years silencing whispered that everything was about to change. And the mighty Blake Sterling had no idea what was coming. Madison Hayes sat at her modest kitchen table, surrounded by scattered papers and her laptop showing lines of code. Her long blonde hair was tied back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes betraying countless late nights spent learning programming. Not for herself, for her boys. Hunter and Mason needed someone who could understand their world, their brilliance. And if Blake wouldn't be that person, she would. The irony wasn't lost on her. 10 years ago, she dropped out of college to support Blake's dreams, convinced that his genius needed nurturing more than her own. Now here she was, teaching herself the very skills she'd once helped him develop, just to keep up with their sons. Her phone lit up with a message from Blake's lawyer. Another demand, another meeting, another attempt to prove she was an unfit mother. She'd learned to stop crying over these messages years ago. The tears had dried up somewhere between the divorce papers and the first time Blake had forgotten to show up for the twins' birthday. Mom, look what we made. Hunter burst into the kitchen, Mason close behind. They were holding what looked like a small robot, cobbled together from spare parts and determination. Her heart swelled with pride and pain. They were so much like their father, the man he used to be before money changed everything. It's amazing, sweetie. Does it work? She pushed aside her laptop, giving them her full attention. Unlike some people. Mason, the quieter of the twins, pressed a button. The robot whirred to life, spinning in a circle and extending tiny mechanical arms. We're going to enter it in the Young Innovators competition next month, he explained, his blue eyes, so like Blake's, shining with excitement. Madison felt her stomach drop. The competition was hosted by Sterling Innovations. Blake would be there, judging, watching. She hadn't told the boys yet. How could she explain that their father, the great Blake Sterling, would probably pretend not to know them? just like he did every time they crossed paths in public. "Mom?" Hunter's voice pulled her back. "Are you okay? You look weird." She forced a smile. "Just thinking about how proud I am of both of you." It wasn't a lie. She was proud of how they'd stayed kind despite their father's coldness, proud of how they supported each other, proud of how they used their genius to create instead of destroy. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Madison found herself staring at an old photo on her phone. It was from 12 years ago, she and Blake at a college hackathon, his arms around her waist, both of them laughing. His eyes back then had been full of dreams, not dollar signs. They'd been so young, so in love, so sure they'd change the world together. Well, Blake had changed the world all right. Sterling Innovations was revolutionizing artificial intelligence, making headlines and billions. But at what cost? The man who'd once stayed up all night just to make her smile now couldn't spare 5 minutes to call his own children. Madison closed the photo and opened her coding tutorial instead. She had her own changes to make, starting with herself. Blake might have forgotten the person he used to be, but she remembered. And somehow she'd find a way to make sure their sons never forgot either. The good parts, at least. The parts worth remembering. What she didn't know was that her next encounter with Blake would shake the foundations of everything he'd built. And this time she wouldn't be the one left picking up the pieces. The Sterling Innovations headquarters gleamed like a crystal fortress against the Seattle skyline. Blake stood in his private elevator, watching floor numbers tick upward while his mind drifted to the upcoming Young Innovators competition. His PR team had convinced him to judge it personally. "Great optics," they'd said. "Shows you care about nurturing young talent." The elevator doors opened to chaos. His assistant, Rachel, was waiting with a tablet in hand and panic in her eyes. "Sir, we have a situation. The list of competition entries just came in and, well, you need to see this." Blake grabbed the tablet, scrolling through names until he stopped cold. Hunter and Mason Sterling. His sons had entered. Of course they had, they were his blood after all. But seeing their names there, in black and white, made everything suddenly terrifyingly real. "Cancel it," he snapped, thrusting the tablet back at Rachel. "Find a reason." "Any reason." "Sir, we can't. The press already has the participant list. If we disqualify your own sons." She left the implications hanging. Blake loosened his tie, feeling trapped. He'd spent years carefully controlling every interaction with Madison and the boys, keeping them at arm's length, maintaining his image. Now they were about to crash into his carefully constructed world, and he couldn't stop it. His phone buzzed, another email from his lawyer. The latest investigation into Madison had turned up nothing they could use against her in court. She was, frustratingly, an excellent mother. Working part-time as a web developer now, taking online courses, volunteering at the boys' school. Perfect. Too perfect. "Mr. Sterling?" Rachel's voice interrupted his thoughts. "There's more. The competition rules require parents to attend with minor participants. Both parents if possible. Both parents." The words echoed in his head. He hadn't been in the same room as Madison and the boys together since that night. The night everything changed. The night he'd made the choice that set them all on this path. Memories flooded back unbidden. Madison's tears as he'd told her he was leaving. The twins, just 5 years old, asking why Daddy didn't live with them anymore. The way he'd hardened his heart, convinced himself it was necessary. Success required sacrifice. He'd repeated those words like a mantra until they became truth. But now, staring at his sons' names on the competition roster, something cracked in his carefully maintained facade. They'd built a robot, just like he used to do at their age. Were they like him in other ways too? Did they stay up late tinkering with electronics? Did they get that same look of intense concentration when solving a problem? He didn't know. He realized with a sudden sharp pain that he didn't know his own sons at all. "Sir?" Rachel was still waiting for an answer. "Should I begin preparations for the competition?" "It's in 2 weeks." Blake straightened his shoulders, his mask of cool indifference sliding back into place. "Do what needs to be done. And Rachel? Make sure my schedule is clear that day. No distractions, no escape routes." As Rachel hurried away, Blake turned to the window, looking out at the city he'd conquered. He'd built an empire worth billions, but for the first time in years he felt something he hadn't expected: fear. Not a failure, he'd mastered that fear long ago. No, this was different. This was the fear of facing what he'd become. In 2 weeks he would have to stand on a stage and judge his own son's work. He would have to look into eyes that matched his own and pretend they were strangers. And somewhere in the audience, Madison would be watching. Madison, who knew exactly who he used to be before the money and the power changed him. The mighty Blake Sterling, who could buy and sell companies on a whim, who could make or break careers with a single word, was about to face his greatest challenge. And this time money couldn't solve it. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. Hunter and Mason sat cross-legged on their bedroom floor, surrounded by circuit boards and tools. Their robot, which they'd named Atlas, stood in the center of their workspace. Mason was making final adjustments to the code while Hunter tested the mechanical arms. "Do you think Dad will like it?" Hunter asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, he builds robots too, right? That's how he got rich." Mason's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Maybe. But Mom says we shouldn't build things just to make other people happy." "I know, but..." Hunter picked up a screwdriver, fidgeting with it. "What if he actually talks to us this time? Like really talks to us?" Before Mason could answer, they heard a crash from downstairs. Both boys rushed to the kitchen to find their mother staring at her phone, a broken coffee mug at her feet. "Mom? What's wrong?" Mason asked, already reaching for the broom they kept in the corner. Madison's hands were shaking as she looked at her sons. "Your father's lawyer just called. Blake, your father, he wants to have dinner with us. Tonight. All of us." The twins exchanged shocked looks. In 5 years, Blake had never once asked to have dinner with them as a family. Birthday cards and expensive gifts would arrive like clockwork, but never this. "Why now?" Hunter's voice cracked with emotion. "Is it because of the competition?" Madison knelt down, pulling both boys into a hug. "Probably. But listen to me, both of you. You don't have to go if you don't want to. We can say no." "We want to go," they said in unison, then looked at each other and grinned. They still did that sometimes, speaking in perfect sync, finishing each other's sentences. It used to make Blake laugh back when he still lived with them. 2 hours later, they pulled up to the Summit, Seattle's most exclusive restaurant. Blake was already there, standing by the entrance in a suit that probably cost more than their car. For a moment, he looked almost nervous, an expression neither boy had ever seen on their father's face. "Madison," he nodded stiffly. "Boys." His eyes lingered on them for a moment longer than usual, taking in their matching blue blazers, a gift from him last Christmas that they'd never had occasion to wear until now. Inside, they were led to a private dining room with views of the entire city. Blake ordered without looking at the menu, while Madison quietly helped the twins navigate the unfamiliar French dishes. "So," Blake cleared his throat, "I heard you're entering the Young Innovators competition." "We built a robot," Hunter burst out, unable to contain his excitement. "It can solve puzzles and help sort recycling and dash." "Hunter," Blake cut him off, his voice sharp. "The competition rules state that participants can't discuss their projects with judges before the event." The boy's face fell. Mason reached under the table to squeeze his twin's hand. Something they'd done since they were little, whenever one of them needed support. Madison set down her fork with a quiet but deliberate click. "They're your sons, Blake. Not competitors. But of course you'd need to actually spend time with them to know the difference." Blake's jaw tightened. "I provide for them. They want for nothing." "Except their father," Madison shot back, then immediately pressed her lips together, regretting the outburst. The twins sat in uncomfortable silence, pushing food around their plates. This was why they never had family dinners anymore. Every conversation turned into a battlefield, with them caught in the crossfire. But then Blake did something unexpected. He looked directly at his sons and asked, Do you enjoy building things?" "Like I used to." "We love it," Mason said quietly. "Mom's learning to code too, so she can help us." Something flickered across Blake's face, surprise, respect, or maybe regret. For a moment, he looked like the man in the old photos Madison kept hidden away, the one with laugh lines instead of worry creases. But before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and the wall slammed back down behind his eyes. "I have to take this. Business emergency." He stood up, dropping his napkin on the table. "Dinner's taken care of. Oh, I'll see you at the competition." As he strode away, Hunter's small voice carried across the room. "You didn't even ask us what we named our robot, Dad." Blake's steps faltered for just a second, but he didn't turn back. He couldn't. Because if he did, he might have to face the tears in his son's eyes. And Blake Sterling had sworn years ago that he would never let emotions interfere with business again. What he didn't realize was that this dinner had set something in motion. Something that would force him to confront not just who he'd become, but why he'd chosen this path in the first place. Back in his penthouse, Blake poured himself a glass of scotch, his hands unusually unsteady. The business emergency had been a lie, an escape route when the weight of his son's disappointment became too heavy to bear. He pulled up the security feed from the restaurant on his phone, watching as Madison and the twins left the building. Hunter was wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Mason had his arm around his brother's shoulders. And Madison, she walked with her head high, but Blake knew that set of her shoulders. She was holding herself together for their sons, just like she used to do for him in the early days when every investor slammed their door in his face. Damn it. He hurled the glass against the wall, watching the amber liquid drip down the expensive wallpaper. The twins' voices echoed in his head. Do you enjoy building things? Like I used to. They didn't even know him well enough to ask about who he was now, only who he used to be. His phone rang. Rachel. Sir, I have the background check you requested on Madison's recent activities. Go ahead. He needed something, anything, to justify his anger, his distance. She's been taking online programming courses for the past year. Straight A's. She's also moderating a support group for single mothers in tech. And Rachel hesitated. She turned down a job offer from Code Tech Industries last month. It would have doubled her salary, but the position required frequent travel. She turned it down? Why? The email correspondence suggests she didn't want to spend less time with the boys. She said they needed stability more than money. Blake ended the call abruptly. Stability. The word hit him like a punch to the gut. When was the last time he provided that for his sons? Hell, when was the last time he provided it for himself? He opened his laptop, pulling up the twins' school records. Perfect grades in math and science, just like him at their age. But there was more. They were in the school choir, played soccer, volunteered at the local animal shelter. They were well-rounded, well-adjusted. Happy. No thanks to him. A new email popped up, photos from the restaurant's security camera. Blake clicked through them mechanically until one made him stop breathing. It was from early in the dinner, before everything went wrong. Hunter was gesturing excitedly about something, Mason was smiling, and Blake was looking at them with an expression he hadn't worn in years. Pride. Wonder. Love. When had he convinced himself that success meant shutting off these feelings? When had he decided that being a good father meant nothing more than writing checks? He thought back to his own father, Richard Sterling. The man had been a successful surgeon, always too busy for little league games or science fairs. I'm giving you a better life than I had, he'd say, dropping expensive gifts on Blake's bed before heading back to the hospital. Blake had sworn he'd never be that kind of father. Yet here he was, worse than his old man ever was. At least Richard had lived under the same roof, eaten breakfast with his son, known his favorite color. Blake couldn't even remember if Hunter and Mason had any allergies. Did they still sleep with the night light on? Did they still love blueberry pancakes like they did when they were 5? His laptop pinged again. An email from the competition organizers. They needed his approval on the stage layout. There was his name in gold letters, Head Judge, Blake Sterling. Below it, in the preliminary schedule, Junior Division participants, Hunter and Mason Sterling. For the first time he noticed they had his last name. Of course they did, he'd insisted on it during the divorce. Sterling was a name that opened doors, created opportunities. But sitting alone in his penthouse, staring at those matching names, Blake realized he'd given his sons everything except the one thing that mattered, a father they could be proud of. The competition was in 10 days. 10 days to figure out how to face his sons, how to judge their work without bias, how to sit in the same room as Madison without drowning in regret. 10 days to decide if Blake Sterling, the tech billionaire, was ready to remember how to be just dad. What he didn't know was that his son's project would do more than just compete for a prize. It would force him to confront the moment 5 years ago that had started all of this, the real reason he'd walked away from his family. And this time, running away wouldn't be an option. Madison sat at her kitchen table long after the twins had gone to bed, staring at their robot Atlas. She'd heard them whispering late into the night, making adjustments, dreaming up improvements. Just like Blake used to do with his prototypes. The memory of those early days hit her hard. Nights spent on their worn-out couch, Blake excitedly explaining his latest breakthrough while she pretended to understand the technical details. Now she actually did understand. A year of intense studying had taught her enough to follow her son's coding discussions, to offer meaningful help instead of just encouragement. She pulled up the competition guidelines on her laptop one more time, checking and double-checking that Atlas met all the requirements. Her phone lit up with a text from her best friend Olivia. Just saw the news. Blake Sterling judging a kid's competition? Is this why you've been stress baking at midnight? Madison glanced guiltily at the pile of cookies cooling on the counter. Baking had always been her coping mechanism, especially since the divorce. The boys are entering, she texted back. Can't talk him out of being head judge without explaining why to the press. Olivia's response was instant, he better play fair. I still have those emails from 5 years ago. Madison's heart stopped. Those emails. The real reason Blake had left, the truth he'd buried under NDAs and corporate lawyers. She'd kept them all this time, her insurance policy against his attempts to take the boys away. But she'd never used them, never even threatened to. The twins deserved to remember at least some good things about their father. A soft creak on the stairs made her quickly close the laptop. Hunter stood there in his robot-patterned pajamas, looking younger than his 10 years. Can't sleep, sweetie? Madison held out her arms and he came over for a hug. Mom? Why did Dad really leave? I mean, the real reason? Madison's breath caught. How could she explain that their father had discovered something that would have destroyed his company right before the IPO? That he'd chosen to bury the evidence and walk away from his family rather than face the consequences? Sometimes, she said carefully, grown-ups make choices they think will protect the people they love. But they don't always choose the right way. Is that why you stopped being a lawyer? To protect us. Madison smiled sadly. She'd given up her law career when she discovered what Blake had done, knowing she couldn't practice law while keeping such a secret. Another sacrifice in a long line of them. I changed careers because I wanted to understand your world better, she said instead. And look how much fun we're having learning to code together. Hunter picked up Atlas, turning it over in his hands. We added something new to the programming. A special feature. Do you think it might make Dad proud? Madison pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. Your father should already be proud of you and Mason. Both of you are amazing, kind, brilliant boys. If he can't see that, it's his loss, not yours. But later, after Hunter had gone back to bed, Madison pulled out an old USB drive from her desk drawer. On it were the emails that had changed everything, proof of what Sterling Innovations had covered up 5 years ago. Proof of why Blake had really abandoned his family. She should have deleted them years ago. Should have let go of the past, moved on completely. But something had always stopped her. Maybe it was the hope that one day Blake would remember who he used to be, would want to make things right. Or maybe it was fear that he'd try to take the twins away if she didn't have leverage. The competition was coming up fast. Blake would have to sit there and judge his own son's work. Would have to look them in the eyes and pretend he was just another impartial observer. But Madison knew her boys, knew how much of themselves they'd poured into this project, how desperately they wanted their father's approval. If Blake hurt them again, if he humiliated them in front of everyone like he'd done to her so many times, well, maybe those emails would finally serve their purpose. What she didn't know was that the twins had a surprise planned. Something in their robot's programming that would force both their parents to confront the past, ready or not. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. Late at night in their bedroom, Hunter and Mason huddled over their laptop, making final adjustments to Atlas's code. The robot sat between them, its small LED eyes glowing softly in the dark. Are you sure about this? Mason whispered, fingers hovering over the keyboard. If Dad finds out what we programmed Atlas to do. Hunter nodded firmly. He needs to see it. Remember what we found on Mom's old laptop when we were fixing it? Mason did remember. They'd stumbled across a folder of emails while trying to recover their mom's crashed hard drive. Emails that revealed the truth about why their father had abandoned them 5 years ago. About the medical testing scandal at Sterling Innovations that he'd covered up right before taking the company public. Dad was testing AI medical diagnosis systems on people without telling them, Mason said quietly. People got hurt. And instead of fixing it, he just buried it. And left us, Hunter added, his young face hardening. He chose money over doing the right thing. Over us. The twins looked at their robot, at the special code they'd added. Atlas wasn't just designed to solve puzzles and sort recycling anymore. They'd programmed it to access Sterling Innovations' old databases during the demonstration. To show everyone exactly what their father had hidden. Mom's going to be mad when she finds out we know, Mason said. Maybe. But she's always telling us to stand up for what's right. Hunter picked up Atlas, examining their handiwork. Besides, we're not doing it to hurt Dad. We're doing it to make him remember who he used to be. Across town, Blake sat in his office reviewing the competition entries. He'd saved his son's submission for last, reading and rereading their project description. A robot designed to help make the world better. It sounded so innocent, so pure. Just like he used to be before. He shook his head, trying to dispel the memories. The whistleblower who discovered the unauthorized medical testing. The choice he'd made to bury the evidence rather than delay the IPO. Walking away from his family because he couldn't bear to see the disappointment in Madison's eyes when she figured it out. "Mr. Sterling?" Rachel appeared in his doorway. "The tech team finished setting up the competition venue. They need you to test the judging system." Blake stood, straightening his tie. "How many entries in the junior division?" 12. "Including." She hesitated. "Including your sons. Sir, there's something else. Security flagged some unusual access attempts to our old servers. Someone's been trying to get into the archived files from 5 years ago." Blake's blood ran cold. Those files were supposed to be buried so deep that even his own tech team couldn't access them. Track it. Find out who's responsible. What he couldn't know, was that the access attempts were coming from 2 brilliant 10-year-olds who'd inherited not just his genius, but their mother's sense of justice. The next morning, Madison found the twins passed out in their room, Atlas clutched protectively between them. She smiled, snapping a quick photo before gently waking them for school. They'd been working so hard on their project, so determined to make it perfect. If only she knew what they'd really been working on. If only she knew that her sons were about to force a reckoning that would shake the foundations of Blake Sterling's carefully constructed world. Because Atlas wasn't just a simple robot anymore. It was a key designed by 2 heartbroken boys to unlock the truth their father had tried so hard to hide. And in just a few days at the competition, everything would change. What no one realized was that the twins' plan would have consequences far beyond what they'd imagined. Sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free, it forces you to become the person you should have been all along. 2 days before the competition, Blake sat in an emergency board meeting, his usual cool demeanor cracking. The security team had traced the server access attempts to a local IP address, Madison's house. "It has to be her," he muttered, pacing his office after the meeting. "She's planning something with those old files." He grabbed his phone, fingers hovering over his lawyer's number, then stopped. Something wasn't adding up. Madison had kept those emails secret for 5 years. Why try to hack the servers now? Meanwhile, at Madison's house, chaos reigned. Atlas was malfunctioning, its LED eyes flickering erratically. The twins had been up since dawn trying to fix it, their breakfast getting cold beside them. "Boys, you need to eat," Madison called from the kitchen. "The competition's in 2 days, you can't solve problems on an empty stomach." "Just 5 more minutes, Mom," they shouted in unison, heads bent over their robot. Mason typed frantically while Hunter held Atlas steady. "The connection sequence isn't working," Mason whispered. "We can't get through Dad's security." "We have to," Hunter insisted. "This is our only chance to make him face what he did." A knock at the door made them both jump. Madison opened it to find Rachel, Blake's assistant, standing there with a stern expression. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Sterling needs to speak with you. Immediately. Alone." Madison glanced at the twins, who were hastily hiding Atlas behind their laptops. "Now isn't a good time. It's about unauthorized access to Sterling Innovations servers. From this address." The color drained from Madison's face. She grabbed her keys and coat. "Boys, finish your breakfast. I'll be back soon. Don't forget you have that school project to work on." The last part was stressed meaningfully, their cover story for working on Atlas. At Sterling Innovations, Blake was waiting in his office looking out over the city. He didn't turn when Madison entered. "If you're trying to expose what happened 5 years ago," he said quietly, "think about what it'll do to the boys." Madison's confusion was genuine. "What are you talking about?" "Someone's been trying to access the sealed files. From your house." Now he turned, studying her face. "If you're not behind it, then who?" They both reached the same conclusion simultaneously. Blake's face went pale. "The boys. But how would they even know?" Madison's voice trailed off as she remembered her crashed laptop, the ones the twins had offered to fix. "Oh God. They know," Blake said flatly. "Our sons know what I did. What I covered up." He sank into his chair, suddenly looking older. "The competition. Their robot. That's what they're planning." Madison should have been angry. Should have been worried. Instead, she felt an unexpected surge of pride. Their sons had discovered an injustice and were trying to right it, just like she'd taught them. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Disqualify them? Have security confiscate their robot?" Blake stared at the framed magazine cover on his wall, his face under the headline "Tech's Youngest Billionaire." What had that title cost him? His integrity? His family? His son's respect? "No," he said finally. "Let them do it." Madison blinked in surprise. "What?" "Whatever they've planned, whatever they want to expose, let them do it. Maybe." His voice cracked slightly. "Maybe it's time everyone knew the truth. Including me." "The truth about what, Blake? About the medical testing? Or about why you really left us?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Rachel's voice came through the speaker. "Sir, the tech team found something. The boys, they're not just trying to access the old files. They're using an AI algorithm to decode them. An algorithm that looks remarkably like an early version of your own code." Blake's laugh was hollow. "Of course they are. They're my sons." He looked at Madison. "How did they turn out so much better than me?" "Because they had at least one parent who remembered that some things matter more than money," she answered softly. As Madison left his office, Blake pulled up the competition schedule one more time. In less than 48 hours, his sons would either expose his darkest secret to the world or what? What was he hoping would happen? For the first time in 5 years, Blake Sterling didn't have a plan. All he knew was that 2 10-year-old boys had managed to do what armies of lawyers and journalists had failed to do. They'd made him face the truth about himself. And somehow, that terrified him more than any business crisis ever had. The day before the competition arrived with a thunderstorm that matched the tension in both households. At Madison's, the twins were making final adjustments to Atlas, their faces serious beyond their years. "What if we're wrong?" Mason suddenly asked, voicing the doubt that had been nagging at him. "What if exposing Dad ruins everything?" Hunter paused in his typing. "He ruined everything when he chose money over people. Over us." But his voice wavered slightly. Madison watched them from the doorway, her heart heavy. After her meeting with Blake, she'd spent hours debating whether to stop them. But these were Sterling boys, stubborn, brilliant, and impossible to deter once they'd set their minds on something. Across town, Blake was having his own crisis of conscience. He'd sent everyone home early, sitting alone in his massive office with a tumbler of scotch and a stack of old photos he'd kept hidden in his desk. There was one of him holding the twins right after they were born, his eyes bright with tears of joy. Another showed Madison helping him build his first prototype, her blonde hair tied back, laughing as she handed him tools. Happy moments. Real moments. Before the money, before the power, before the choice that had cost him everything. His phone rang, the head of his security team. "Sir, we've analyzed the boys' code. It's brilliant. They've created an AI that can bypass our best firewalls by mimicking authorized access patterns. It's based on your original work, but they've improved it. At 10 years old, they've improved on your design." Blake ended the call, his hands shaking. Pride and shame warred in his chest. His sons hadn't just inherited his intelligence, they'd surpassed it. And they were using that brilliance to expose his greatest sin. The rain intensified outside his window as a memory hit him like a physical blow. 5 years ago, in this very office, when the whistleblower had first brought him evidence of the unauthorized medical testing. People had been hurt by his company's rushed AI diagnostics program. Lives had been ruined. He could have come clean, could have delayed the IPO and fixed things. Instead, he'd buried the evidence. Paid people off. And when Madison, with her razor-sharp legal mind, had started asking questions, he'd walked away from his family rather than risk her discovering the truth. Now his own sons were about to expose everything. Tomorrow, in front of hundreds of people, including the press, they would reveal what kind of man he really was. And he'd decided to let them do it. Blake picked up another photo. The twins on their 5th birthday, the last one before he left. They were wearing matching science-themed party hats, frosting on their cheeks, beaming at the camera. He tried to remember the last time he'd seen them smile like that around him. His phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "The boys are asking if you're still coming to their presentation tomorrow." Blake stared at the message for a long time. They knew what he'd done, knew what kind of person he was, and they still wanted him there. His fingers moved across the screen. Wouldn't miss it. In their bedroom, Hunter and Mason were carefully packing Atlas into its carrying case. They'd added one final feature to their robot's program, something neither of them had told the other about. Because sometimes even twins keep secrets. Madison tucked them in that night, noticing how they held hands across the gap between their beds. Something they hadn't done since they were little. "Mom?" Hunter's voice was small in the darkness. "Whatever happens tomorrow, You won't stop loving us, right? Madison's throat tightened. Nothing in this world could ever make me stop loving you boys. Nothing. As the storm raged outside, 3 people lay awake in 2 different homes, all thinking about tomorrow. About truth and consequences. About family and forgiveness. About a small robot named Atlas that was about to change everything. None of them knew that the biggest surprise wouldn't be the exposed secrets or the public revelation. The real shock would come from an unexpected source. A last-minute addition to Atlas's programming that would force both Blake and Madison to confront not just the past, but their future. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. The Sterling Innovations Convention Center buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of people filled the auditorium, tech industry leaders, press, proud parents, and nervous young competitors. Blake stood backstage, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, watching the crowd through a gap in the curtains. 5 minutes until the junior division presentations begin, Mr. Sterling, Rachel informed him, tablet in hand. Your sons are in position with their robot. They're asking to see you first. Blake's heart hammered in his chest as he made his way to the preparation area. Hunter and Mason stood there in matching blue suits, his Christmas gift to them, with Atlas positioned carefully on the table between them. Madison stood slightly apart, her expression unreadable. Dad, the twins said in unison, then looked at each other, sharing one of their silent conversations. We want you to know, Mason started. Whatever happens today, Hunter continued. We did it because we love you, they finished together. Blake felt something crack inside his chest. These boys, these brilliant, brave boys, were about to expose his darkest secret to the world, and they were doing it out of love. Mr. Sterling? You're needed on stage, Rachel called. As Blake took his place at the judges' table, the first presentations began. Young inventors proudly displayed their creations: solar-powered water purifiers, educational apps, environmental monitoring systems. But his attention kept drifting to the side of the stage where his sons waited with Atlas. Finally their turn came. Presenting next, the announcer's voice boomed, Hunter and Mason Sterling with their project, Atlas Automated Truth and Legacy Analysis System. The audience murmured at the shared surname. Blake saw several phones raised to record what everyone assumed would be a heartwarming moment between a tech mogul and his prodigy sons. The twins walked onto the stage, Atlas rolling smoothly between them. They looked so small under the bright lights, but their voices were steady as they began their presentation. Atlas was designed to make the world better, Hunter began. To right wrongs and reveal truth, Mason added. To remind people who they used to be, they said together, looking directly at their father. Blake's hands gripped the edge of the judges' table as the twins activated their robot. Atlas's LED eyes glowed bright blue, and a holographic display flickered to life above it. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of displaying the damning evidence they'd uncovered, Atlas projected a different set of images. Old family photos, video clips, memories. Blake recognized them all. The day he'd taught the twins to ride bikes. Madison helping him practice his first investor pitch. Family dinners filled with laughter. The moment he promised his sons they'd change the world together. The twins looked confused. This wasn't the program they'd written. Or at least not the one they'd written together. In the audience, Madison gasped softly as she realized what was happening. The twins hadn't just inherited Blake's technical genius, they'd inherited her heart. Somewhere along the way, each boy had secretly modified Atlas's program, choosing love over revenge. Atlas's display shifted again, now showing split-screen footage. On one side, news headlines about Sterling Innovations' success. On the other, the human cost of Blake's choices. Not just the medical testing scandal but the personal toll. Missed birthdays. Empty chairs at school events. 2 young boys growing up wondering if they mattered less than money. Blake stood up from the judges' table, his legs unsteady. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of tech's most powerful figures walked onto the stage, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. The twins looked at each other, then at Atlas, whose display now showed a single question. Is it too late to start over? What happened next would be talked about in tech circles for years to come. But more importantly, it would change the lives of 2 young boys who had chosen to fight for their father's soul instead of his destruction. Because sometimes the greatest innovation isn't in technology, it's in the human heart. The auditorium had fallen completely silent. Blake stood on stage with his sons, tears still flowing freely down his face. Atlas continued projecting images, a digital timeline of love, loss, and the possibility of redemption. "We found Mom's emails," Hunter said, his voice echoing in the quiet hall. "About the medical testing. About why you left. But we also found something else," Mason added, pressing a button on Atlas. The robot's display changed, showing lines of code. "Your original AI design. The one you wrote before the company, before the money. It was meant to help people." Blake stared at the code scrolling across the holographic display. His first project. The one he'd worked on in that tiny apartment with Madison bringing him coffee and encouragement. Before investors and IPOs had corrupted his vision. "The medical AI wasn't ready," he said, his voice hoarse. "People got hurt because I rushed it. Because I wanted the IPO more than I wanted to help people. So I buried it. Buried everything. Including my heart." From her seat in the audience, Madison stood up. She'd never seen Blake like this, stripped of his corporate armor, raw and vulnerable in front of hundreds of witnesses. "But Atlas is ready," the twins said together. "Because we finished your work. We fixed it." The robot's display shifted again, showing test results. Complex medical diagnostic algorithms, refined and improved by two 10-year-old boys who had inherited not just their father's genius, but their mother's moral compass. "We didn't just want to expose the truth," Hunter explained. "We wanted to fix what went wrong. To finish what you started," Mason added. "The right way this time." Blake fell to his knees in front of his sons, pulling them into a tight embrace. The audience forgot about their phones, forgot about recording the moment. Some were crying openly. "I didn't leave because of the scandal," Blake whispered to his boys. "I left because I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in your eyes when you found out what I'd done. I thought if I stayed away, gave you everything money could buy, it would make up for not being the man you deserved as a father." Madison made her way to the stage, her heels clicking against the steps. She'd spent 5 years protecting their sons from the truth about their father. Now they had protected him from himself. "The presentation isn't finished," the twins announced, turning back to Atlas. "There's one more thing." The robot's eyes flickered, and its final display appeared. It wasn't about the past anymore, it was a business plan. A complete reorganization of Sterling Innovations, transforming it from a profit-driven tech giant into something new. Something better. "Sterling Family Innovations," Hunter read proudly. "Where helping people matters more than helping the stock price," Mason finished. Blake looked at the proposal in amazement. His sons hadn't just exposed his mistakes, they'd created a path to redemption. A way to reclaim not just his family but his soul. "What do you say, Dad?" they asked together. "Ready to change the world? The right way this time?" The audience held their breath, watching as one of the most powerful men in tech faced the choice that would define not just his legacy but his life. And this time, Blake Sterling didn't hesitate. Blake stood up slowly, keeping his hands on his son's shoulders. He turned to face the audience, but for the first time in his career, he wasn't performing. He was just a father, standing with his children. "When I started Sterling Innovations," he began, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, "I was a kid with a dream of helping people. Somewhere along the way I lost that dream. Lost myself." He looked down at Hunter and Mason. "But my sons found it. They found me." Rachel rushed onto the stage with a tablet, panic in her eyes. "Sir, the board is calling an emergency meeting. The stock price is already responding to the medical testing revelation and dash." "Let it fall," Blake interrupted. The audience gasped. Maybe it's time Sterling Innovations remembered its real value isn't measured in stock prices. He turned to Madison, who stood watching with tears in her eyes. "I've spent 5 years running from my mistakes. Running from the truth. Running from the family I should have been fighting for." Atlas whirred softly, its display showing the new company structure the twins had designed. A ethical tech corporation focused on medical AI, environmental solutions and education. The kind of company Blake had originally dreamed of building. "Sterling Family Innovations," he read aloud, testing the words. "I like it. But only if..." He took a deep breath. "Only if your mother agrees to be our chief ethics officer." Madison's eyes widened. "What? You were always my conscience, Maddie. The voice in my head telling me to do the right thing. These past 5 years without that voice, well, you can see what happened." He managed a small, self-deprecating smile. "Our boys need both of us. And maybe I still need you too." The twins exchanged excited looks. This was better than their original plan, better than they dared to hope. The board won't like it, Rachel warned. The board can either adapt or resign, Blake replied firmly. I've spent too long letting fear of losing money stop me from doing what's right. Not anymore. He turned back to the audience, to the phones recording every word. Sterling Innovations made a mistake 5 years ago. We hurt people because we valued profit over safety. Today, thanks to my sons, we're going to start making it right. Hunter and Mason beamed with pride as their father continued. Every person affected by our rushed medical testing program will be contacted and compensated. The improved diagnostic AI that my brilliant boys created with Atlas will be made available to hospitals at cost. And this is just the beginning. From the back of the auditorium, someone started clapping. The applause spread like wildfire until the entire room was on their feet. Not for Blake Sterling the billionaire, but for a father finally choosing his family over his fortune. Madison stepped forward, placing her hand over Blake's where it rested on Hunter's shoulder. The boys need a good night's sleep before we start reorganizing a billion-dollar company, she said with a small smile. Does this mean you're coming home, Dad? Mason asked hopefully. Blake looked at Madison, a question in his eyes. She gave a slight nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but permission to try. If your mother agrees, Blake said softly, I'd like to start having family dinners again. Real ones where I actually stay for dessert. The twins launched themselves at their parents, creating a group hug that made the audience break into fresh applause. Atlas spun in a happy circle, its LED eyes glowing brighter than ever. What no one noticed was Rachel, still standing to the side, receiving message after message from board members and investors. The real battle was about to begin. But this time, Blake Sterling wouldn't be fighting it alone. 1 month after the competition, the Sterling family sat around their dining table. Not in Blake's cold penthouse or Madison's cozy home, but in a new house they'd chosen together. Atlas stood in a special charging dock in the corner, a reminder of the day that changed everything. The medical compensation program is fully launched, Blake announced, passing the salad to Hunter. Thanks to your improved AI diagnostics, we've already helped identify and treat conditions in 300 patients who were affected by our original testing. And the board? Madison asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd been there for every meeting, every fight, as the newly appointed chief ethics officer. Half of them resigned, Blake smiled. Good riddance. The new board members all believe in Sterling Family Innovations' mission. Profits are down, but impact is up. Way up. Mason looked up from his plate. Are you sad about not being a billionaire anymore, Dad? Blake set down his fork, considering the question carefully. His net worth had dropped significantly since redirecting company resources to ethical initiatives and compensation programs. The press had called it either corporate suicide or corporate redemption, depending on which channel you watched. You know what I realized? He said finally. I spent 5 years being the richest man in Seattle, and I was miserable every single day. Now I'm just a millionaire, he winked at the twins. But I get to have dinner with my family. I get to help people. I get to be the man your mother always believed I could be. And the man we knew you still were, Hunter added quietly. Madison reached across the table, squeezing Blake's hand. They weren't back together romantically, trust took time to rebuild. But they were partners again in parenting and in purpose. The new pediatric AI program launches next week, she reminded everyone. The boys' coding is going to help thousands of kids get faster, better diagnoses. Speaking of coding, Blake turned to his sons. How would you like to start an after-school program? Teaching other kids about ethical tech development. The twins' eyes lit up. Can we use Atlas to help teach? Of course. That robot did more than save our family. It reminded all of us what technology should be used for. Helping people, solving problems, bringing families together. Outside, the Seattle rain fell softly as the Sterling family continued their dinner, talking and laughing like they hadn't done in 5 years. On the wall, a new family photo hung beside Atlas's competition trophy. But it wasn't just a photo, it was a promise. A promise that some things matter more than money. That it's never too late to change. That the greatest innovation isn't the technology we create, but the love we choose to put back into the world. Because in the end, true success isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch and the legacy we leave for our children. And sometimes, it takes the wisdom of 2 10-year-old boys to remind a millionaire that the richest man in the world is the one who has a family to come home to. What counts isn't the wealth you accumulate but the love you share and the difference you make. For the Sterling family, this wasn't just a happy ending, it was a new beginning. A chance to change the world, one ethical innovation at a time, together. If you enjoyed this story about redemption, family, and doing what's right, please don't forget to like, share, and hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us. And if you want to show extra support, you can use the super thanks button below. Every contribution helps us create more meaningful content like this. Leave a comment telling us what you thought about the Sterling family's journey. We love hearing from you. Thank you for watching, and remember, it's never too late to choose love over money.